Florida's rainy season brings damp mornings and air heavy with humidity. For ranch managers, it is also one of the most unpredictable times of the year. Rain changes the scent of the landscape, causing many animals to alter their travel routes overnight. That is why I decided to begin today's survey before sunrise, checking every monitoring site around the ranch to see how the feral hogs have been moving. The first site is the one I have the highest expectations for. Over the past few weeks, this area has consistently shown heavy signs of activity, so I expect to collect valuable new data. However, when I arrive, the site is surprisingly quiet. There are only a few fresh tracks, and the level of activity is much lower than I anticipated. To be honest, I feel a little disappointed, especially since this is the first stop of the day. Still, I quickly remind myself that in field research, unexpected results are just as important as the ones we hope for. They suggest that the feral hogs may have changed their routines or shifted toward areas with better food sources. The next location is a wide grassy pasture inside the ranch. The scene here is completely different. Large sections of lush green grass have been rooted up, and the ground is covered with layers of fresh, overlapping tracks. In just one night, the entire area has changed dramatically. Standing in the middle of the pasture, I feel both surprised and concerned. These grasslands are not only an important food source for livestock, but also the foundation of the ranch's operation. Signs like these suggest that the impact on the property could be much greater than we had previously imagined. Leaving the pasture behind, I continue to another monitoring site near the trail leading into the low woodland. The evidence collected here indicates that a much larger group of feral hogs has been active in the area. What catches my attention is not simply their numbers, but the signs showing that they attempted to escape in several different directions once they sensed human activity nearby. Looking at the claw marks on the ground and the heavily trampled soil, I realize that the way wildlife responds to changes in its environment is far more complex than any camera alone can capture. As we move deeper into the forest, the appearance of the vegetation gradually changes. Thick tree canopies allow only scattered rays of sunlight to reach the ground. Here, I observe a group of feral hogs with noticeably darker coats than those usually seen near the open pastures. Morgan believes this difference may be related to the habitat and environmental conditions of each area. Observations like these provide valuable information for comparing groups of feral hogs living within the same region, but using different types of terrain. By late afternoon, we inspect another survey site near an area of open woodland. Activity here is significantly lower than at the previous location. At first, I am a little disappointed because I had hoped to gather more information. Then I realized that this uneven distribution is actually a common characteristic of wildlife. Some places are full of activity, while others remain almost silent. Only by combining observations from every location can a true pattern begin to emerge. As we arrive at the final site, the Florida sky turns a deep shade of gray. Before long, heavy rain begins to fall, turning the dirt roads into slippery stretches of mud. Traveling through the forest becomes much more difficult, Yet the rain also preserves fresh footprints with remarkable clarity. Standing beneath the trees, watching the raindrops strike the ground, I reflect on the day's survey. Some sites exceeded every expectation, while others were completely different from what I had predicted. But that contrast is exactly what makes nature so fascinating. It is constantly changing and never follows a fixed pattern. By the time I return to the ranch after dark, I spread out the survey maps once again and compare every note collected throughout the day. The rainfall, the newly formed travel routes, and the changing levels of feral hog activity all contribute to a clearer overall picture. Every survey helps us better understand the behavior of these animals, while providing ranch managers with the information they need to make informed decisions that reduce conflicts between agricultural operations and the natural ecosystem. It is a long-term process that requires patience, continuous observation, and respect for the natural patterns that have always existed. The first trap had been placed beneath a massive old tree with a wide canopy, where several game trails converged before disappearing into the forest behind the farm. Even from a distance, Mason noticed that the trap door was already closed. As we approached, we were surprised to find a large number of wild hogs inside. The moment they sensed our presence, the entire group became restless, constantly moving around in search of an escape, but the trap remained securely locked. The damp ground surrounding the trap was covered with fresh tracks, confirming that a large sounder had passed through during the night. Mason carefully documented the scene, inspected the structural integrity of the trap, and completed every step required under the farm's wildlife management procedures before we continued to the next location. The second inspection site was located along the edge of a pine forest, where the ground was noticeably drier but still covered with fresh signs of activity. At first, we expected to find only a few additional hogs in this area, but the results far exceeded our expectations. The trap had captured an entire group of wild hogs. Mason could hardly hide his surprise as he reviewed the footage from the trail camera, because the sounder had followed exactly the travel route he had predicted several days earlier. It was another reminder that studying tracks, movement patterns, and the animal's activity schedule plays a vital role in effective wildlife management around the farm. By midday, we arrived at the third trap, positioned near a dirt road wide enough for specialized vehicles to access. This trap had been triggered the previous night, and everything remained in excellent working condition. After inspecting the site and confirming the trap's condition, the support team brought in a specialized vehicle to carry out the required management procedures in accordance with local regulations. Placing the trap in an accessible location significantly reduced both time and labor, while minimizing the need to travel through difficult swampy terrain. Later in the afternoon, we headed toward the fourth trap, located not far from the edge of the forest. This site had shown heavy wild hog activity during the previous week, so Mason had high expectations. This time, however, the results were less encouraging. There were noticeably fewer fresh tracks around the area than before, suggesting that the sounder may have altered its travel route following the recent heavy rainfall. Although the trap itself continued to function perfectly, only a small number of wild hogs had been recorded. Rather than assuming the location had lost its effectiveness, Mason marked it for continued monitoring over the coming days. The fifth trap also produced disappointing results. It had been placed along a narrow trail leading into dense vegetation bordering the marsh, an area that had previously experienced frequent wild hog activity. However, the evidence on the ground showed that most of the tracks were already old, while the newer ones branched off in a different direction. Mason believed that changing water levels throughout the wetlands had caused the sounder to adjust its travel routes. The modest results from these two consecutive locations served as another reminder that even previously successful trap sites must be continually evaluated and adjusted according to changing environmental conditions. By the time we reached the final inspection site, the Louisiana sky had nearly disappeared into darkness. Insects echoed throughout the forest, while patches of water between the trees reflected the first light of the evening moon. Even from a distance, Mason noticed that the trap door remained firmly closed. As we moved closer, everyone was surprised to discover that this location had recorded the largest group of wild hogs of the entire day. Dense tracks stretched from the forest edge all the way to the trap, indicating that a large sounder had passed through only a few hours earlier. After completing the inspection and recording all the necessary data, everyone agreed that this would become one of the highest priority locations for continued monitoring. On the drive back to the farm, Mason looked over the map, marking all 6 inspection sites from the day. The first 2 locations had produced outstanding results. The 2 in the middle had been disappointing, but the final trap had ended the day with an important discovery. In wildlife management, no 2 days ever produce exactly the same results. Consistently monitoring the field, updating data, and adjusting trap locations according to changing natural conditions are what ultimately allow farms to reduce long-term damage and adapt to the constantly changing movement patterns of wild hog populations. I decided to set a total of 5 traps, and the first one was placed in an open clearing deep in the woods, an area covered with fresh signs of wild boar activity. After finishing the setup and spreading bait, I left to continue placing the remaining traps in other locations. The work lasted for hours, but throughout the entire process, I couldn't stop thinking about that first trap, wondering whether it would actually work as planned. When I finally returned, I could already tell from quite a distance that something had happened. The silence that normally covered the area was now broken by loud, chaotic noises coming from the direction of the trap. And as I got closer, the sight in front of me genuinely caught me off guard. Inside the trap, an entire group of aggressive wild boars had been captured. They shoved against one another, moving wildly in panic. But no matter how violently they reacted, they still couldn't escape. The second trap had been placed right beside the forest edge. After checking the first trap, I could barely wait any longer and immediately headed toward the second location. The moment I got close, I realized something was wrong. The wire mesh surrounding the trap was shaking violently in the stillness of the forest. As I moved closer, the scene became clear. A pair of wild boars was trapped inside, thrashing around desperately while trying to escape. They slammed repeatedly into the fencing, spinning around inside the confined space and creating sharp, tense bursts of noise. But despite how aggressively they reacted, the trap continued to hold them firmly inside. That day had already been more than enough, so we decided to stop and leave the remaining traps unchecked until the following morning. As darkness fell, wild boars slowly began emerging from the woods, following the scent of bait into the traps through the silence of the night. When we returned the next morning, I almost froze at the sight in front of me. The number inside had increased dramatically. It was no longer just a handful of boars like before. Now there were dozens packed tightly together inside the confined space. They moved chaotically, creating relentless crashing sounds that made the atmosphere feel more intense than ever. Another trap showed clear signs that a large number of boars had entered during the night. The tracks and damage left inside proved that the original group had been much bigger. But when we checked the trap the next morning, the scene was completely different. Only 7 boars remained inside. It was obvious that most of them had escaped. The signs around the area showed that they had actually leaped over the fencing to break free, something I never expected them to do so easily. That alone proved these wild boars were not only numerous, but also incredibly strong and extremely reckless. The final trap turned out to be the biggest surprise of all. It had been placed in the middle of an exposed clearing, a location where I honestly didn't expect much because there was almost no natural cover around it. But when we checked it, the result was the complete opposite of what I anticipated. Inside was an entire herd of wild boars, both fully grown adults and smaller juveniles, crowded tightly together inside the trap. Clearly, they had let their guard down in a way I never expected, and that was exactly what turned this trap into one of the most successful locations of the entire operation. After finishing the inspection of every trap, I stood still for a moment and looked back across the vast area surrounding us. This time, the results went far beyond my expectations, not only because of the numbers, but because of how the wild boars were adapting and reacting. Some traps worked perfectly, but other situations revealed something far more concerning. The boars were becoming bolder, more unpredictable, and much harder to control. And that made me realize one thing clearly. Even though we achieved results today, this confrontation is far from over.